Death is the one true guarantee for all of us. Though it's hard enough having to come to terms with the inevitability of our own deaths, it is perhaps even more jarring to face the grim reality of one day losing our loved ones. How does one cope with the realization that you will one day lose the closest person to you?
What happens when we find out something terrible or awful about the people that we love? Many of us, like the main character in our story, know more than we would like to admit. It's in these places that sometimes we create our own reality, hiding the truth behind comfortable thoughts. But one day, though, we might have to confront that truth. And if you're like the character in our story, Eddie, that day will be the hardest, most difficult, but most beautiful day of your entire life. This is Glimpse. Hi, my name is John Gruwell. I am a third-year humanities major here at the University of Texas, focusing on creative storytelling and social change.
My name is Jason Serrato. I'm a third-year rhetoric and writing major, focusing on health information technology.
A big part of this class is reaching out into the community. We were told to have our eyes open for anybody that could have a potential story. A person that I always thought that would have a compelling story would be a bus driver. I've ridden a lot of buses here at UT, as I feel like a lot of you might have as well, and I felt like they would have an interesting perspective that many of us hadn't really seen before. So one day, I decided, let's just see if a bus driver would like to be interviewed. So on the bus, I wrote him a little note kind of outlining what we were doing in the class and asking him if he would potentially like to be involved. I left my contact information and I just kind of gave it to him as I left, and he contacted me back. I feel like the whole thing was actually pretty serendipitous.
The man that John met that day is Ricky Washington. Ricky Washington has been a bus driver for Austin Capital Metro for the past 31 years. He's a business owner, a church-going man, and a contributing member of his community. Most people just know him as Ricky the bus driver, but he's faced a life filled with remarkable tragedy. John and I have had the wonderful opportunity of getting to know him better over the course of 3 intimate interviews.
The interview process. Most people would see interviewing a complete stranger as pretty scary. And you know, I kind of saw it a little bit scary as well. But luckily, I was able to draw from my dad's own experience of interviewing war veterans, which he actually hopes to use those interviews to one day write a book about that. I feel like maybe I kind of got some of his friendliness towards people through osmosis. I don't know. But we kind of drew that while interviewing Ricky Washington. So after recording our
So we recorded the interviews. When we went into the interview, we didn't know what was going to happen because neither of us knew him. He told us up front that he's a very private person, so we didn't know how much he was going to give us initially, but he really opened up over the course of those interviews. Through interviewing him, we learned that a lot of people open up much more than they expect to. Everyone wants to share their story, and everyone wants to connect. If you give people the opportunity to share in a non-threatening environment, they very likely will.
But how do you take someone's personal stories and choose just one of them to write a short script about? That was one of our big struggles. Ricky had a lot of compelling stories that we could have used, but ultimately we were just led to one story. Glimpse. On a lonely Texas country road at night, a stubborn man is confronted with the reality of his wife's illness and struggles to keep her alive against her wishes. Here's a little bit about our writing process for Glimpse. So if screenwriting had a Bible, and in that Bible were a set of commands, one of them would surely say, "Thou shalt know 3-act structure, and thou shalt enjoy the process of getting to know it." We came to know and love and hate and love 3-act structure while writing Glimpse.
In adapting Glimpse, we started with the most powerful moment from Ricky's interview, the moment his wife threw her medicine out the window. We worked hard to try to incorporate as much of the real story as we could in order to stay true to the heart of what actually happened. The challenges came with deciding whether certain elements should be added or altered in the interest of enhancing the narrative. Once we had an idea of what story we wanted to tell, it became a 1-page outline like you see on the right, through which we learned the importance of concision, keeping only those necessary elements, and telling a story through visible action. After a couple of excellent peer review sessions, it was ready to be made into a script.
An amazing part about interviewing actual people is you get to know who your characters are personally. You hear how they talk, you know how they're going to react in a certain situation. So in writing Glimpse, we tried as much as possible to use the actual interviews to bring into the final script. On your left, you see the moment that Ricky was talking about his wife throwing the medicine out of the window, and then to the right is how it ended up looking in the end.
Revise, revise, revise. Glimpse has been through 6 revisions over the course of the semester, and it's been to so many different places. It started off being a relatively minimalistic story, basically in one setting, with very stilted dialogue. At one point, there was an ambiguously spiritual doe that followed Eddie throughout the story, trying to help him come to terms with his wife's impending death. But that idea didn't last. Dialogue was the most difficult part of the story to get down in a satisfactory way. But with the help of Evan and our peers, as well as through various brainstorming sessions, we believe the conversations have become much more natural.
So what does Glimpse look like? What do we feel like it's about? The mood of Glimpse. We say it's suspenseful. This is an emotional story, and we feel like it's very humane. We feel like the genre is definitely a drama with themes of love, death, and denial. So here are some examples of sets and locations with the parts of the story that they actually relate to. On an old Lincoln town car makes its way down a small, overgrown 2-way road in the country. Mild fog obscures the view. Eddie pulls into the parking lot of an antique-looking gas station in the middle of nowhere. Lauren reclines against Eddie in a tiled bathtub, her chest rising and falling. We see Glimpse set in the modern era, but the small town in this story clings to the remnants of a past time. But essentially, we see this story as being timeless.
In looking for professional actors and actresses to play the parts of the characters in a story, we looked at Chiwetel Ejiofor and Thandie Newton. Chiwetel Ejiofor has very powerful, dynamic performances, and looks like the type of person who would fight very strongly for the people he cares about. Thandie Newton has a history of playing characters that go through so much, but she also has the capacity to exude strength despite an apparent physical frailty, which is key to understanding Lauren's character. Visually, we see Scott Wilson being Joe in the story. Joe is a small-town countryman who really cares about the people he comes in contact with. If you were to consider making this film, we found 2 local actors you can take a look at, Aaron Spivey Sorrells and Ruby Lee Dove II. Aaron has that broad build that Eddie is described as having in the story.
Let's take a moment to listen to what the person that we interviewed, Ricky, thought of reading the script and kind of the process in general.
There's so many different aspects of my life. And I haven't even told it all. I just gave glimpses of it. You know, it's like, do I need to go to the next part and tell all the other part, or should I just stop and leave well enough alone? It made me remember stuff that I had forgotten, or emotions, or things that I just really had put away. You know, just kind of like, and so it was kind of neat to kind of relive some stuff. And like, oh wow, I forgot about that, you know. And some of it was good and some of it was bad, you know.
If there's one thing that Ricky, John, and I can all agree on, it's that this whole project took us through the full range of emotions and gave us an experience unlike anything we've ever had before. Glimpse is a story about a man wrestling with the inevitability of his wife's death. He is humbled, just as we all are, by the realization that some things are simply out of our control.
Glimpse is a story that confronts the very essence of what it means to be human. The struggle between life and death, the desperateness with which we hold our earthly comforts, and the understanding of what it means to truly love someone beyond our own personal benefit, even if it means letting that person go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So picture yourself in the 1970s in California. You're a student at USC in Los Angeles, and you're walking on campus one day. You walk past the statue of Tommy Trojan, the school mascot, when a woman approaches you and she asks you, "Do you believe in God?" You end up engaging in meaningful conversation and actually later join the group that she represents, which is a cult that has gained popularity across the US.
7 years later, you are ready to be married to this cult. You're amongst 2,500 other couples in Madison Square Garden Arena. This wedding day is the day leading up to our story, Flushed. My name is Adrian Rios. Like I said earlier, I'm a rhetoric and writing major and minor in advertising.
And I'm Emily Hunker. I'm a senior linguistics major with a minor in Spanish.
So what does this cult have to do with our story?
So the cult is the Unification Church. It was founded by this man here in Korea. His name is Sun Myung Moon. He claimed to be the Messiah and touted principles of peace and love and wanted to create a pure family from his followers, where he conducted these mass weddings. He had the matches himself, and he had these mass weddings with tons of couples.
So during this period, the Moonies were facing a lot of controversy, like other cults during that time. And mainly, Reverend Moon was accused of exploiting his followers as well as brainwashing them. So to combat this, there's an upcoming trend mainly between family members of a step-by-step process called deprogramming. But despite all these controversies, the Moonies is actually still an active group today.
And yeah, there was and is a real appeal to being a part of this cult. They created an environment filled with love and support and made it really about this mission of peace and unifying religions, where followers, it was less about being an individual and more about being a part of something greater than oneself.
So how does this connect to our story?
So this right here is Christian. This is the background story of Christian, or our protagonist, Paul. And Christian is my dad. He joined the cult on that fateful day on USC campus, and now lives in North Austin. He's a natural food salesman. He's active in the community here, in the Marine Corps League, because he was a Marine, and also other community groups.
So Emily and I conducted 3 interviews with Christian to gain some insight on his life and acquire some material on how to translate this complicated life story into a captivating script.
And yeah, for me, the interview process was invaluable. I was able to talk with my dad about things that have never been brought to the table and ask questions that I've never had the opportunity to ask. It was a real bonding process for us, where walls that have been there were broken down, and I learned so much about him and his past.
So the experience for me was a little bit different. So I was walking into Christian's house as a complete stranger. So having Emily there was really advantageous for the process because she was able to ask very specific and direct questions. So it kind of created this environment where Emily was orchestrating this interview and Christian was storytelling to me. So I became his audience and he became the storyteller for each interview.
And actually, my dad gave us so much material and so much information, there was just an overabundance. We had so many stories that we wanted to work with. But once we heard him speak about his dad, which that's my dad and his father, we honed in on this dynamic of a father and a son.
And it was actually really challenging to create this conflict and make it tangible. And we realized we need to focus on one moment, one story, and one conflict, and that's how we arrived at Flushed. So during this process, once we found our story, we realized how it kind of overtook our lives. This story was a constant presence in our minds, and it's a gnawing factor every moment. And we went through phases of loving it and hating it and despising it and loving it again. And the story didn't care because it was always, always there.
Literally always there. So when we would get struck with creative ideas, other than working in person, which took up a lot of our days, we would furiously text back and forth, as you can see here, with ideas, arguing about plot points, and celebrating creative genius. It was constant.
Yeah. Also, feedback from Evan and our classmates were crucial to this process, especially when trying to figure out how to adapt this really complicated life story into a very structured and strict 3-act structure.
But Flush didn't start as Flushed. So first there was Peace, where we focused on Paul's life in the Marines.
And then it was Kumbaya, which was Paul being recruited on campus, and that didn't feel right either.
Nope. So then there was Bloom, where Paul was fundraising on the road with the cult, but still not the right focus.
And then we had Vow, which we kind of established the dynamic between Henry and Paul, the main characters, but then it was just muddied with extra scenes and characters and locations, and that also didn't feel right.
So then finally, we got Flushed. We honed in on 2 characters, honed in on one conflict.
So Emily and I realized after working on this for so long that we really needed some outside perspective on our script. So we collected a sample of 15 outside members who have no background on the story and asked them to read the script and answer 3 questions. First question, what was their general emotions throughout the script? Second question, what scene was most captivating to them? And lastly, which character did they identify with more?
Right, and so from their text, the answers that they submitted, either we wrote it down or they emailed it to us, we accrued the top 100 most frequent words, content words, not conjunctions or anything meaningless, and display it here in this word cloud. And the most frequent words are the largest. And so this survey really did two things for us. It, as you can see in this depiction, gave us a much better feel for what fleshed means to other people. Some of the most common words include sad, gloomy, dark.
And another benefit of this survey was that we discovered a very clear divide amongst members of the sample of who identified with Paul and who identified with Henry. Usually the older members of our sample identified with Henry's parental component, and a lot of the younger people identified with that rebel within Paul. And it was kind of clear evidence that Flesh can relate to a wide range audience.
Right, and this divide actually became so clear that I just realized
Basically, the divide became so clear, we realized that us ourselves had a little bit of conflict on which teams we belonged to.
Right, yeah.
So one of us was Team Henry.
And one of us supported Paul,
Yeah.
but that's besides the point. To talk about the story, right? The story really begins when our protagonist makes his big first choice and he asks Henry for the ring.
Which I think is ridiculous because Henry it's Henry's ring, and he didn't react. He maintained composure and simply asked him to have a bite of food. That's it.
Right, which was extremely manipulative, but still, Paul concedes and he eats, and Henry does not give him the ring. But Paul doesn't have it, he snatches it, he goes to the bathroom, he has the ring in his hand, and he realizes this ring that connects him to his father, he no longer needs. He goes to the bathroom, flushes it down the toilet.
And Henry witnessed this and is absolutely devastated. And because of Paul, Henry is now completely left alone.
And Paul is leaving empowered. He exits the house, leaving his past behind him, ready for the future ahead of him.
Clothes in a dryer tumble as a curly-haired man, Paul, walks in.
So here, it's going to be a 1970s era piece. So we have like those pastels really featured, the bright patterns of the 1970s.
The van is parked in a suburban neighborhood.
Here's how we see Paul, our protagonist, arriving at his father's house.
Henry reaches into his shirt, pulling his dog tags over his head, revealing the ring.
We really want the ring as an object to stand out amongst all others.
Paul releases the ring from his hand. Paul flushes the toilet.
And what we want to happen to the color scheme as you enter Henry's home is the 1970s are still present in the decor, but it gets darker, it gets more still in the house as soon as you enter. So outside in the laundromat, you can see it's bright, it's pastel, but then once our protagonist enters, it's, much gloomier.
To further this vision, we found Hollywood actors David Morris and Casey Affleck as an idealistic representation of how we envision Henry and Paul. In this image specifically, that's how we imagined Henry's emotional reaction once he witnesses Paul flush the ring. And Casey Affleck's, the combination of his vulnerability and the capability of being able to deliver that powerful monologue that Paul does in the bathroom encapsulates what we see in our characters.
And so these Hollywood ideals, we searched local talent and really found their representations in these two actors, Gary Schnitzer as Henry and Cade Burke as Paul.
So to us, the most appealing aspect of Fleshed is its simplicity. It's one main location, it's one story, and it's one conflict between two characters. And in this dynamic, this conflict between a father and a son, the struggle amongst family, it's an aspect that I think each one of us can relate to.
And beyond this relatable bubble is the world of the extraordinary. We get a glimpse into the life of a cult member, something that's predominantly unreachable, but incredibly enticing to witness. And it's when these two worlds, the world of the ordinary and extraordinary, collide, that this story is manifested.
The
story of Flushed.
So much of a person can be said just by looking at their shoes. It can always vary because you can tell by the color of the shoe, the tears, the rips, and the vibrancies of what they have. You can see what 1,000 words could never say. So Itzela Garcia here, the owner of these black Converse, has entrusted Ben and I with her story to adapting it on film.
and we think her trust is in good hands. Alyssa and I, or Alyssa is a third-year rhetoric and writing major and Spanish major, and she comes from a family of Mexican immigrants, and I myself, Ben, I'm a second-year English major, come from a family of Venezuelan immigrants. So Alyssa and I were happy to be paired together because we both had this common goal of wanting to share a true Hispanic story that was free of the stereotypes that we feel like we constantly see in the media. And so with that being said, we have Itzel's story here. Whenever we interviewed Itzel, she was a natural storyteller. During the interview process, she had tons of stories to tell about growing up in Mexico and living on the border and what her childhood was like being between the two countries. And so in the interview process and in the storytelling process, all three of us, Alyssa, Itzel, and I, like I said before, we just wanted to tell a true story. So with that being said, this is what we came up with. A naive girl is stalked by a sinister spirit, pressuring her to grow up too quickly when her cousin brings a new pair of high-heeled shoes for them to try on.
So writing this story was a bit more difficult than we imagined. Ben and I are natural creative writers. We're rhetoric and writing majors as well, but we also take our own creative writing classes on the side. So on top of that, the screenwriting is very difficult. And I'd compare it to learning to write with your left hand, if you're right-handed. And so with that, the biggest problem we ended up having was with the three-act narrative structure. So we thought it was easy because we thought the climax is the most important part of this movie. That's what everyone remembers. And we thought we had it with Itzel peeing on her cousin's shoes. And with that, we thought, okay, we can come up with a scenario and be able to manifest that. So the inciting incident wasn't too difficult as well. But the biggest problem we had was trying to find a motivation for our character. And as we kept revising our story, we kept finding that her peeing on the shoes just wasn't making sense. It felt very forced and unnatural. And every time we went back in our classroom or into ourselves, we just kept trying to figure out how we can adapt this and make it flow as a story. And what Ben and I really had to do was just to be able to go back and understand our character more. So with that, we ended up getting Zapatos.
So Zapatos, as you guys read, is a story of Itzel. She's 10 years old. She's reading in her living room when she hears a strange clicking sound. When she goes to investigate, she finds out that it's her cousin who's trying on this new pair of high-heeled shoes. So Itzel believed that it was El Cucuy, but is relieved to find that it's just her cousin. So the girls try on the shoes and they're having fun, pretending to be older. And then we have a boy from next door come over and he sees how nice Kenya is. Itzel's cousin looks in the high-heeled shoes, and then he sees how Itzel doesn't look so nice. So he insults Itzel and flirts with Kenya. So Itzel gets mad and scares the boy away. And then this is whenever we see El Cucuy start to become a reality for the girls and a physical monster. And so because the girls have these shoes on and they're playing around with them, we see El Cucuy as kind of like
we see El Cucuy come, like, manifest himself as just the early sexualization
right.
of girls. And so that came with the high-heeled shoes because it's just provocative for young girls to wear.
Yeah.
So with that, Itzel tries to throw away the shoes. She tries to get rid of them, but this monster, El Cucuy, keeps coming back and giving the shoes back to her. So eventually, she's able to denounce early adulthood by peeing on them. And that might sound a little silly, but in a way, it makes sense because in the Latino community, there's always a big problem with the loss of innocence at a young age. It's a very patriarchal culture. So women here are obligated to kind of take on that motherly role at a very young age. And actually, that's where the concept of the quinceañeras came in, because the quinceañeras was made to a girl to be displayed to get married when she turned 15 and considered a young woman. But even younger than that, they're still very sexualized by the men. So Itzel really has to come with childhood versus adulthood, and that really comes with the shoes when they're introduced. So El Cucuy, that might be something a little strange. The best way to describe El Cucuy is that it's the Mexican equivalent of the boogeyman. So El Cucuy is just a little silly story that your parents will tell you before you go to bed. They'll say, oh, don't stay up too late or El Cucuy will eat you. That's about it. But what I liked about it is that I was able to take something very personal to the Latino community and be able to manifest it on the screen. But have it symbolize something else. And so I had El Cucuy symbolize the early sexualization of young Latinas. So with that, El Cucuy comes, and, well, El Cucuy doesn't come. El Cucuy comes, but because, early sexualization, so sorry. El Cucuy is represented, and we had decided to add it here because we feel like that this is a big taboo in the Latino culture, and something that many people are kind of afraid to talk about, and that a lot of us have experienced firsthand. So by taking El Cucuy and reappropriating it for our story, for its meaning, we think that that just carries on a lot, and it'll be something very powerful for a girl in a similar situation to watch and be able to say that I don't have to grow up just yet, that I'm okay just the way I am. So for the style of the film, we envision something like the Babadook. So the Babadook is, what we liked about the Babadook is that it was able to take these very raw and complex emotions and be able to manifest it into something fearful. So in the Babadook, a child's book reveals an evil entity, and as the same, similar to Zapatos, where the high-heeled shoes brings on a fearful creature that lures girls into an early sexualization. So for our story,
For the story, we for the casting and the locations, we wanted to keep everything local to make it easier. Here we have a picture of Itzel around the age of the story happened, and then we have Rainy Rodriguez, who we feel like portrays Itzel pretty nicely. She still has that cheery look in her face, but that's still kind of like team of rebellion in her. Mm-hmm. And then for the next two characters, we found Leia Diaz to portray Kenya, and then Maria Natera as Lita, or Itzel's grandmother. I feel like these people just they portray Hispanics well, and they're real characters and what we're comfortable with seeing on screen. Mm-hmm. And then, in terms of shooting the location for the house, we figured the neighborhood of East Cesar Chavez would be a good place. This is a house that we found for rent online. But we like the neighborhood because it's kind of ambiguous as to where the location could be set. It appears it could either be in the United States or Mexico. And we just feel comfortable with this representation of the neighborhood.
So for the mood of the story, it's going to be very dark and it's going to have a lot of tension, but we envisioned it to open up with something very tranquil with the use of the warm colors here. But we also see the story as kind of progressively getting darker as it continues. And that progression symbolizes how Itzel is, or the sexualization that's coming to Itzel, and it's corrupting her absolutely. And it's kind of catching up to her throughout the film, but then at the end, whenever she denounces it, it's going to turn back to its warmer, more comforting colors. And another color that we really like to see in the film is the color green, just because the color green represents lust, greed, envy, and that is the lust that Cucuy has for the young girls, the predation, and also that the envy itself feels because she wants to be just like her favorite cousin, Kenya. So overall, we think that it's essential that we state for the Latino community to be properly represented in the film, just because there's been a lot of instances where Hispanics have been misrepresented in the media, and we'd like to be able to change that because currently Hispanics are the largest ethnic group in the United States, and by 2043 they should be the largest group in the United States itself. But currently they're only represented in 3% of the media. So here we see a lot of potential in the market just to be able to go in and get it to have Latinos have their voices portrayed on the big screen.
So ultimately, Zapatos matters because we are remastering a story that is so commonly known in the Hispanic community. We have this entity, this El Cucuy, who is preying on these girls, but in our story, there's a girl who triumphs and who overcomes it. And so hopefully, if there's a girl in the audience, she can relate to Itzel and know that she doesn't have to grow up. It's okay for her to not grow up so quickly.
Take Zapatos into consideration for funding because not only will you be able to have a story that resonates for the Latino community, but you'll also be able to touch into a market that hasn't been explored before with unforeseen possibilities. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
a heartwarming father figure, boyish angst, and a gripping coming-of-age tale. All of these things and more can be found in Nomad, a short film by the creative team of Trey Gutierrez and Ryan Kerbeau, the greatest creative duo since Batman and Robin.
Yep.
Who are Ryan Kerbeau and Trey Gutierrez, you're probably asking yourself? And more importantly, why should you care? Well, we're about to tell you.
First up to the plate, Trey Gutierrez, the bro nana, as you can see here. Trey is a born and bred Austinite who enjoys screenwriting, playwriting, and directing in his spare time. When he's not doing these things, he enjoys perusing the famous Austin local live music scene and dancing around in banana outfits.
Ryan Kerbeau is a local student screenwriter filmmaker based out of Austin, Texas. He's accomplished a lot of things with his life, including rising to the ranks to become an Eagle Scout, as well as being the superhero at the Arrow, as you see from this photographic evidence right here.
Don't tell anybody.
Keep that on the DL, that is his secret identity.
Real
Ryan's
secret.
devotion to duty is only rivaled by his creative capacity. And this creativity is what led us to our interview subject, someone who we feel is a kindred spirit here at Gutierrez Kerbeau Studios, Christopher Lucas.
Christopher Lucas was sort of an unexpected candidate for us. I didn't have a third interview candidate, so he was suggested to me by Professor Evan, and he seemed like the least likely candidate for someone that we were going to produce a story out of the interview. But once we listened to his interview and realized his stories really addressed sort of simpler themes, really thematic elements that everyone experiences that translate well to a short film medium, we decided to go with him for our presentation. Christopher grew up without a father figure. He was alone on the road with his mother for much of his life, a real nomad, if you will. This lack of a strong male influence led to him being somewhat of a troublemaker, a little bit of a prankster, but he was always deeply intellectual and curious about the meaning of life. He displayed an eagerness and creativity all through his life, leading him through college to achieve many things, and this spirit sort of stayed with him all through that. To get a little bit further into it, upon listening to Christopher's interviews, we realized that the magic of the story was really going to be in not embellishing too much, not trying to change the story too much to make it more cinematic, to just stick to the actual tale of Christopher, Dusty, Gemma, and Keith and this Alaskan sort of expedition. His story really speaks to the themes of isolation, family, simplicity, and growing up that I think are pretty universal. So upon grabbing this theme out of the interview, we decided to go into a brainstorming session, a really relaxed environment. We hung out either in my living room or in libraries. We just hung out as friends, really spitballing, talking about the process, trying to figure out the best way to approach it. And this led us to the take that we really wanted to have. So the lead writer in this project, which would have been me, the secondary writer was Trey, the lead writer would create the script, and the secondary writer would go through, comb through it, and sort of give feedback. Any little story beats that needed tweaking, anything that needed changing would be changed, and we took it to our peers. At that point, we incorporated peer feedback, continually tightening up our script and making it more powerful and more tight.
After we got that fear feedback, we actually went around and we made complex charts where we graphed out the events of our script in the first, second, and third act of our script, where we saw how these acts fit into one another and how one cause maybe affected something else. Through doing this, we saw how our script maybe functioned as a whole instead of just separate scenes. And we got an idea for how our script really flows. Because one of the main goals here at Gutierrez Kerbeau Studios is really to have a script that flows and something that makes sense and can stand on its own merits. By graphing our script, as we've done here on whiteboards, we actually also found some things that maybe we didn't notice before when writing our scripts. For instance, when we graphed our script like this, we noticed that there was a much wider scope of the tension between Dusty and Christopher than we originally found when we wrote this.
It sort of strengthened the relationship between Christopher and Keith as well.
And
made
of course,
it stronger.
It really wouldn't be a revision process with about pages and pages and pages of notes upon notes upon notes from our lovely peers in the back here. Through our peers picking apart every single little failing of our script, we were actually able to fix all these little things that maybe were holding our script back and come over with a more concrete kind of
narrative,
and maybe something that's a little more airtight and something that actually makes sense as a whole.
Okay.
At a glance, this story really deals with having to roll with the punches that life throws at you and getting back up each time something knocks you down, as well as how security can be found in some of the least likely places.
Also deals with the themes of home and father figures really strongly. But to get into it a little bit more, the story is really the story of a young boy struggling between the desire for a home, some sort of home-like situation with his mother, whether that be on the road or in a house, versus his tense relationship and dislike of his mother's significant other. This conflict really takes place, there's a catalyst when a co-worker of Dusty's approaches him. His name's Keith, and he offers him a job working on an oil rig in Alaska. He also offers Dusty's girlfriend and son the opportunity to stay in his own home while the two men travel to Alaska to sort of get things set up. So when they arrive at the house, tensions grow in the already strained relationship between Dusty and Christopher, yet companionship and sort of a mentor role is found in an unlikely place with Keith. And they bond over their mutual love of mechanics and sort of a philosophical musings on life. But things are pushed too far when Christopher realizes that his mother, Gemma, is planning on going with Dusty to Alaska instead of staying in Idaho with him, sort of leaving him on his own. So at this point, he takes off on his bike down the road, sort of a metaphor for embodying his own independence, taking matters into his own hands. Yet he falls into an ice puddle and is too cold to ride his bike back, so he's forced to walk it home. And this is when Dusty and Gemma arrive to pick him up, but Dusty won't let Christopher into the truck because he's so wet and the truck is already packed with all the tools for the move. So this takes us to really our midpoint, our really most impactful confrontation, where we realize that Dusty and Christopher really don't have any common ground. Dusty could care less whether Christopher lives or dies. He actually accelerates regardless of his safety. And so they have a confrontation, and this leads us to the all is lost moment where Dusty, in retaliation, absconds with all of the tools and the truck, leaving Christopher and Gemma alone in Keith's house with nothing.
However, in the end, kindness of strangers does in fact prevail, when Keith takes in the now homeless mother and son into his own home, finally giving them that sense of belonging they've been looking for such a long time. To kind of give you guys an image of what we had in mind as we wrote this script, we've included some visuals for your viewing pleasure. Prepare yourselves
to enter the world of Nomad. Christopher tinkers with a red hybrid bicycle. So this is sort of the anchoring image of the film. The bicycle sort of represents Christopher's independence, his loner attitude. Everything that is Christopher is sort of symbolized in this bike. An old Studebaker pickup truck is parked under a tree in the morning fog, an overly large camping shell attached to the bed. This is where Christopher, Gemma, and Dusty would have been living right before receiving the job offer. So this is what they were getting away from. To this. The house was large and old, nestled in a nook between two mountains. Green wildlife mingled with frosty dew in the front yard. So this is sort of an approximation of Keith's house, the main setting of our film. And finally, he rides a long way down an open road flanked by trees. He rides until the sun is high in the sky. And this is sort of setting the stage for our most impactful moment, one of the most climactic moments in the film, the road, where Dusty and Christopher have their icy confrontation.
A lot of these beautiful locations can actually be found in our own home state of Texas. For example, Rosanke, Texas. It's a beautiful rural town on the outskirts of Bastrop, Texas. It's about a 45-minute drive from the University of Texas. Many friendly locals, many of these locals are in fact elderly, including my grandfather, who has actually generously agreed to give up his house for the filming of this movie, should it go forward. It's a very picturesque house, kind of old-timey inside and out, and I think that would be perfect for filming the interior shots of our movie, as well as the exterior shots of the house. Leading into and away from the house, as well as all over Rosanke, are these wide dirt roads that are undisturbed by man-made structures on the side, surrounded by nothing but pine trees and nature. We think these wide open dirt roads would be a perfect and reasonable area to film the climactic truck scene of our film.
As far as casting goes, we went a little bit A-list to give you guys a more wider sense of what we're going for.
Ty Simpkin, in all the roles he does, he always brings such a childish energy and such a youthful naivety into everything he does that we thought that these qualities were very important in portraying the main character, the youthful, rebellious nature of Christopher.
For our main mentor figure, there was no one else other than the man, born and bred Austinite, Matthew McConaughey. All right, all right.
All right.
No one can bring the authoritative and powerful nature to this character as well as the inner soft-heartedness like we believe McConaughey could. For me, I never considered anyone else for Dusty other than Charlie Hunnam because he's sort of got this long, blonde-haired, hippie culture-esque look as well as this rebellious nature and this boyish charm, but he really conceals an air of viciousness underneath it that I think is crucial for Dusty's character.
In the same vein, there was nobody else we had in mind when writing the script for the character of Gemma than Michelle Monaghan. Michelle Monaghan has such a youthful good look about her, as well as a kind of uncertainty in all the characters she performs, as well as a determination that is almost uncharacteristic of somebody like her. We think that this determination and uncertainty really helps to portray the uncertain role of the mother, Gemma.
So this is a quote from the novel that's sort of a symbol in the script as well, On the Road. Nothing behind me, everything ahead of me, as is ever so on the road. And I think this quote really speaks to the spirit of the character because Nomad is the story of adapting to whatever environment, learning to trust that one's own home is really ultimately yourself. And if you're true to yourself and what you see around you, everything will ultimately fall into place. Why Nomad? We really see this film as sort of a cross between Boyhood and Gran Torino, a mentor story as well as a coming-of-age story tinged with a really indie air about it.
There are a lot of reasons to choose the film of Nomad, but we think mainly audiences will connect with the crushing lows that our characters experience, as well as the fleeting images of hope that they find as they look for home and wherever they lay their heads down at night.
Finally, Nomad.
Thank you.